Bilingual Redditors, have you ever heard someone talk about you secretly in another language that didn't think you understood? Once on the subway in New York, this young guy tells his friend in French, "Who would wear red pants?" I turn to him and say, "You'd better watch out, you're not the only one that speaks French." His friend then gets extremely embarrassed and says, "I told ya so." ASL here. You'd be surprised at how many deaf people freely talk shit about everyone. It really is a different culture. I went to a school that had a deaf college. NTID, have you heard of it? And yes, we know they talked shit. There is also an elitist attitude among the deaf I felt. I think it was admitted by other deaf students that this attitude exists. I'm American. I was in Paris on the metro, and I heard these drunk American girls talking about me. I glanced at them and heard one say, "Do you think he's listening?" And her friend said, "No, we're speaking English. He probably only understands French. I don't even speak French. Must have been pretty drunk, since like 40% of France speaks English." Living in Germany for a few years, I could understand German. Traveling in a barn somewhere near Augsburg. Little girl around the age of 5 or 6 with her mother sat opposite and pointed at me as asked why I am so black. Mother patiently explains about Afro-Americans and slavery and freedom. Girl waves me while leaving. I am Indian. Not me, but heard from my dad, a stamp collector and an associate curator at the Carnegie Museum. They sold off the collection long ago. A group of Polish falcons wanted to see the museum's Polish collection and started trash talking, Polish of course, about how badly their country's stamps were presented. The Carnegie Museum had at that time absorbed the entire Smithsonian stamp collection. The curator, Hungarian, spoke English, French, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, and a few other Eastern European languages. After a minute or two, he walked over to the group and kindly asked them to leave, in perfect formal Polish. The curator's parting shot was, the last cultured Pole was Copernicus. Backpacking in China, a little girl near me asks her dad, "What kind of person is that?" I answered in Chinese, "I'm an American." I get this from kids all the time in Korea. Usually they point and yell, "Hey mom, it's a foreigner." Mom starts laughing instead of smacking their kid for being rude. In response, my boyfriend look at each other in horror, then yell in Korean, "Wah, it's a Korean person." Usually the mom and kid go wide-eyed and are shocked. I'm bilingual, English and French. I was in the hospital recovering from surgery, high as duck on morphine, when shift change occurred. The two nurses were talking in French, one briefing the other on the 4 patients in the room, who had all been speaking English with their visitors. The briefing included color commentary about our personalities, some of it being relevant to our medical status. For example, woman in bed 2 hasn't gone to the bathroom yet on her own, used a commode, because she's being a big baby. Man in bed 3 has problems hitting the bowl, and that it might be better to have a catheter put back in than to have housekeeping come back every hour. And that he's an asshole for thinking it's funny. When they got to me, nurse 1 said that I was high as duck and hilarious, and that nurse 2 would enjoy any conversations I had with my dad if he came back. I sat up, said, "Thank you, my dad thinks I'm funny too," in French, and laid back down. They both stood awkwardly, and then said, "You'll be discreet?" I nodded and said, "For more pudding." More pudding arrived. Oh, yes. All the time. My other language I speak is Hungarian, which is really obscure and not related to any other language, beyond vague grammatical ties to Finnish and Estonian, and there are less than 15 million native speakers, of which just under 10 million live in Hungary proper. So Hungarian speakers will often just assume it's a secret language, when outside Hungary no one else will understand, because 99% of the time it's true. That said, there are enough Hungarians in some places, like San Francisco, that it's best to not assume this, and I overheard people quite a lot the summer I worked there. I remember for example hearing a couple arguing on a Saturday night in the grocery store, in the tone that normally you'd be having that argument at home, but they assumed no one else understood them. I've overheard hugely emotional goodbyes and confessions in train stations and airports, that likewise should have been at home. You really just sorta cringe and turn the music up loudly on your MP3 player, because telling them to stop would just be more awkward for everyone involved. My mom and dad had the best story like this though, when they were in Austria for their first Christmas as a married couple. Apparently at the table next to them at Christmas Eve dinner in a restaurant, there was a man by himself who had a German Shepherd, and he was letting the dog literally eat the food off his plate, and all sorts of things like that. So my mom spent the entire dinner complaining about this guy letting his dog do all these things in a restaurant, etc., in Hungarian, but at the end of the meal, as he got up, the man came over to their table and said, "Kelums karakson ian nepakat kivanok," and left. In Hungarian that's the polite way of wishing someone a happy Christmas holiday. Props to that guy, and props to my mom for telling this story to us as kids, to not rely on our secret language too much in public. I worked as an English teacher in a Japanese high school. I wanted my students to use only English in class, so I never let them know I understood and spoke Japanese. For a year I overheard them talk about how long they thought my dong was, whether I had a Japanese girlfriend, and so on. At the end of the school year, with all the students gathered in the gym, the principal asked me to make a farewell speech, as I was returning to my home country. So I stepped up to the mic and delivered my speech in fluent Japanese. Ever see 800 jaws drop at the same time? It was glorious. German here. It's astonishing how many people think they are safe if they speak English. They must be aware that English is the universal business language, besides French, in a lot of countries, right? Besides that, I listen to a lot of relationship things which people probably should discuss in privacy. I picked up a summer job at a local fast food joint this summer, while on break from college. I'm a white guy from Southern California, and, while not fluently bilingual, I speak a fair bit of Spanish. During my first day, the rest of the workers, as I found out later, thought I was the owner's son and treated me like I was a king, which really confused me at the time. After they came to the realization I was just a normal guy at a part-time job, the chitter-chatter started, and some began to complain to each other that I shouldn't be there, getting territorial as if I were intruding, because I wasn't like them. One woman in particular really didn't like me. About a week into the job, I overheard her saying something about me being an asshole and getting in her way. Later on that day, she told me to help her with bringing something to the kitchen from the freezer downstairs, because she was busy, to which I responded in Spanish, "But you called me an asshole. Why should I help you do your job?" She was taken aback, and kind of stammered off, embarrassed and muttering under her breath. Felt good to confront her and watch her get all red in the face. After that happened, people didn't seem to mind me that much. Haha, yes, last Saturday was a holiday for me, So I did the usual boring festivities, usually meaning going to people's houses. And one house there was this guy, typical Desi guy with a big mustache. He decided he'll make cracks about me to the other guys there in Urdu. They believed that because I always spoke in English that I couldn't speak Urdu. Called him out, he was embarrassed, and apologized profusely. 10 out of 10 would do again. I spent a few years in Seoul, and gained near fluency after about a year of immersion. Most days on the street I'd hear something about the size of my nose or my blue eyes. Usually it was satisfying enough to look right at the speaker until they paused. Then I'd just introduce myself and ask them about their day. Met a lot of cool people. In some situations it was a game. One of my Korean friends was fluent in English. We used to take the bus together and talk about whatever, just to see what happened with the crowd. He spoke English, and I replied in Korean. Really messed with the other passengers' heads. Good times. My mom speaks an obscure dialect of Chinese, although not very well, since she learned English upon going to school. But she can still usually understand anyone else speaking the Cantonese dialect. One day we went to a market in Chinatown, and my mom was trying to order something, but the people had a hard time understanding her because obscure dialect. At that point, the old ladies behind us started talking smack about us in Cantonese. My mom said what she got out of it was, "That lady is very Americanized, her Chinese is terrible." And her daughter, me, is clearly half white. and because of that she is ugly. We gave them the stink eye. Asian culture is usually pretty direct like that. In Korea, I was asked my age a few times, which I thought was odd. Another time, a girl just randomly took a photo of me. I asked why. She said she wanted to send it to her friend. Just odd behavior, lol. I'm a high school English teacher with mostly Hispanic students, and you'd never know it by looking at me, but I also speak Spanish. I never advertise this to my classes, until something like this comes up. I've caught students talking trash about other teachers, about me, trying to cheat on tests and papers, all kinds of stuff. One time that stands out was when a student warned another one not to try cheating, and she responded with, "He's gurito, no sabe nada, he's a little white boy, he doesn't know anything." I looked at her and responded, "Sabes guessed a gurito en chinta de loc dices. You know, this white boy understands everything you say." There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by some kid in the back going, "Oh shit." And then the whole class erupted. I was hiking at the Grand Canyon with my friend and my brother a few years back, and there was a small group of young Japanese girls, high school age, hiking behind us. On the way down, I hear them talking about how attractive my brother is, and giggling. I find it funny, but I didn't say anything. They keep talking about him, and then later my friend, and chatting about who gets who, and still I say nothing. We get to a small overlook with a rock ledge sticking out that's sort of hard to access, and my daredevil brother manages to climb around the backside to get a better picture. One of the Japanese girls sees him and says she wants to go over there too, but she looks like she is going to jump to it, which seemed dangerous. So, I told her, in Japanese, that she should go to the other side to climb up. Those girls were absolutely stunned and looked beyond embarrassed. They knew I'd understood everything. I'll never forget it. I was at Disney World on a school trip, and there was a German father and son standing in front of us in line. They were looking around and muttering all kinds of insults, the usual, fat stupid American BS. Now, having been an exchange student in Germany for a year, I perfectly understood everything they said. So I turned to my friend and started not so subtly insulting them, making sure they could hear me. The father turned around and said to me, "You may not understand us, but we understand you." I looked him right in the eye and said with a big smile on face, "Ma hen zed but a K North stand, yeah. Let's not make a scene, okay?" I am Hispanic, and fluent in both English and Spanish, and people often think I don't speak Spanish. So there was this one time I was at a laundromat folding clothes, while these two Hispanic ladies are at a table across from me folding their clothes. Both of them are speaking loudly in Spanish, so I couldn't help but overhear what they were talking about. They start talking about alcohol. One of them said, ever since she got married and had a kid, she stopped drinking. The other chick was saying that she loved getting drunk, and could not live without alcohol, that she wanted a boyfriend so he could buy her alcohol and take care of her kid. Then they both start talking about their ideal boyfriend. One of them says that she is lucky to have found her husband, because he is everything she wanted in a guy. The other chick was listing off a huge checklist of her perfect guy. Hot guy, must worship her, buy her everything, amazing job, clean, cook, take care of kids, etc. She then is interrupted by her friend saying that she was never going to find her perfect guy with her list being so long. She then turns and looks towards me saying, "What about a guy like him?" Her friend immediately rejected that idea. She then began to make fun of my clothes, hair, glasses, everything. I'm a pretty nerdy looking dude. She says how I look like a loser who is doing nothing in life, probably that I'm poor and won't be able to buy her things, and more. I think to myself that this chick is quite rude, and loudly reply in Spanish, "I wouldn't be into a chick like yourself, because I wouldn't want a lazy drunk for a girlfriend." She got silent and just stared at me. Her friend began to laugh uncontrollably. As a brown guy living in Japan, most people assumed I was a tourist and didn't speak Japanese. I used to overhear all kinds of weird/interesting conversations on the train. My favorite would have to be overhearing two Japanese schoolgirls about how hairy my legs are, and wondering if it would be possible to make a carpet out of it. I didn't know if I should be flattered or offended. Gave them a wink as I walked out at my stop. Felt pretty badass. Mandarin speaker. It happens all the time. The weirdest time, though, I was in a clothing store in Tokyo, and a family came up and asked me a question in Japanese. I had no idea what they were saying, and then they started talking amongst themselves in Chinese, about how I could possibly get by in Tokyo without understanding Japanese. Yeah, I hear ya. I can speak Polish. By speaking Polish, you can, in varying degrees, understand Ukrainian, Czech, Slovakian, and to a small degree, Russian. I've heard a few things directed to me once or twice. On one particular occasion, 2 Ukrainian girls were talking about me on the subway, but not letting them know I understood. When I had to get off the train, I simply smiled at them and said, "I understood everything you two were talking about," and left. Their faces dropped. So much, yes. I am a man with very long hair. One evening at Dell HQ, the Spanish-only speaking janitors were behind me waiting for the elevator, and one of them says, "She sure has a nice ass and beautiful hair." They turned red when I turned around to show them my long, elegant beard. I said, "Gracious," in a cute girly voice.